A new threat looms over businesses choosing to reopen. Eyewitness News reporter Jaleesa Irizarry with the legal fallout of the coronavirus.
The signs are all there. Texas is officially reopened for business, but being a trailblazer in this sense may actually set some businesses up for failure.
Yes, it's going to take a while.
St. Mary's law professor Vincent R. Johnson is warning of the risks businesses are taking reopening in these unprecedented times.
I think that the fact that Texas was early on has put businesses in a less certain position as to exactly what steps should be taken.
With little direction, Johnson says businesses are vulnerable to a slew of lawsuits from potential employees or customers who are at risk of contracting the virus.
I think some suits will be filed. I think they will attract attention. I think businesses will pay attention, and they will do the things that will minimize transmission of the disease. And when they do that, they're going to be doing good for themselves because they're avoiding the risk of a lawsuit.
But businesses may be able to avoid it altogether. Johnson says there are talks of legislation that could immunize businesses from these very suits, something he says the owners would love to see, but he would find unfortunate.
There is inadequate testing. The point is we have to create incentives to safe practices to make up for all of those deficiencies in the existing system.
Jaleesa Irizarry, KEN 5 Eyewitness News.